Hey, what's up guys? Gonz here for the FaceLikeTheSun YouTube channel. I wanted to say thank you to all the people who really encouraged me to check out Stranger Things. I really did enjoy the program. It was really well done. And the fact that so many people requested that I check it out and talk about it, and the fact that it's been discussed on alternative media outlets that touch on the paranormal, supernatural, and metaphysical, means that the makers of Stranger Things have truly hit their target audience, which is us and this generation. But the phenomenon is so big that even Forbes published an article about it called How Stranger Things Accidentally Made Netflix Even More Relentlessly Relevant. And there have been several breakdowns of this exclusive Netflix show on YouTube and on the internet. If you search around, you have the Illuminati Watcher who did a thing on it, as well as YouTuber What Is Real, who did a really nice breakdown.
11 in esotericism typically represents a bridge or gateway from one dimension to the next. That's why 11 is the one to tear and rip a hole through the fabric of space and time, making a bridge or a portal gateway from the right side up to the upside down. The show has many numerological connections, from 7s to 13s to 77s, and even Dr. Brenner, when interviewing Winona Ryder, says that we've lost 6 people, and he says six people, cleverly encrypting a 666 into the show before Joyce and Jim Hopper make their way into the upside down. Joyce and Jim Hopper encounter 2 pillars. It's kind of hard to see in this image right here, but there's 2 pillars and then something in the middle, and that's just before they find Will, or the Will again, which is being engulfed by 666, right? 2 pillars, or 11, the gateway to the divine or the gates of hell.
KJ from Scariest Movie Ever, as always, definitely nailed it and shared some of the thoughts that I definitely had while I was watching it. And some of those items I'll allude to throughout this video, but hopefully I can provide you a different perspective or a different angle on this whole thing. For those of you who are unfamiliar with Stranger Things, a really quick, brief summary of the show. It's described in Wikipedia as a, quote, American supernatural horror science fiction web television series, which is almost tailor-made for someone like myself. It's set in November of 1983, which would have made me a 10-month-old baby. And the premise seems complex now that I've watched it, but this premise on Wikipedia puts it really succinctly, so I'll just read that. Quote, on November 6th, 1983, in the town of Hawkins, Indiana, 12-year-old Will Byers vanished mysteriously. Will's frantic mother, Joyce, searches for him while Police Chief Jim Hopper launches his own investigation. Will's friends, Dustin, Mike, and Lucas, discover a psychokinetic girl who claims to know Will's location. As they uncover the truth, a sinister government agency tries to cover it up, while a more insidious force lurks below the surface. End quote. I believe this show is popular at a surface level because of its many 80s pop culture references and a glimpse into what life was like as a preteen kid before the world of the internet, right? It's just totally different, and it appeals to that nostalgia that I've said before. People like us, born in the 80s, we're the last generation to live before the world of the internet, which goes to show how huge the internet is in terms of its vehicle to promote certain concepts and ideas, like it does here on Stranger Things. But the show's richness in the plot and the characters and the outright references to fringe subject matters really gives Stranger Things a depth that very few shows have achieved. But even behind all that richness and great plot and all that stuff is this really deep well of occult symbolism throughout the show, connections to pagan mythologies and deities, to the obvious references to Spielberg and the 80s style cinema, which beyond just a nostalgia thing, I think is an homage to the people in the era who really did define how to captivate an audience with a story that delivers occulted realities, to the revealing of the kinds of outcomes that resulted from mind control experiments with children like MK Ultra. It appeals to the idea of human psychology and imagination in connection to the unseen world as it bleeds into our world. It touches on the quantum anomalies that create portals and gateways into this unseen underworld. The obvious tip to the realities of electromagnetism having a huge part of this construct of how these portals and dimensions work with each other, and even the messianic symbolism laid right in front of us with one of the most important characters of the show, 11, which they call El, again, reference to God in Hebrew, or divine being in Hebrew, who recalls of the torturous experiments conducted on her in the MK Ultra program and defeats the Demigorgon, or this demonic entity in the show, by sacrificing herself. And so the show is jam-packed with these references, and there's no way I'm going to be able to touch on every single one of those references. It's just too rich. And I don't know if all of the references here were intentional or not, but it definitely has struck a chord with a lot of people, and it's become a phenomenon, which in itself says something about where we are in society. Now, on this YouTube channel, we've talked a lot about the bleed through between the unseen world and this world, the spiritual dimension with this physical dimension, and how it's been happening and how the effects have been documented in many different ways, from paranormal events to now digital events, and the crossover there with a lot of the devices now that capture disembodied voices and things like that, and the many videos and photos we've seen of alleged paranormal events, some of it fake, some of it unexplained. There is a undergirding reality to this idea of openings into the other side or the other world, what the show Stranger Things calls the upside down. And it's a theme that's been shown to us throughout media. And it comes in the form of this black darkness, this deep, and really this black goo. Now, I made 2 short videos on black goo, and there are others like Nicholson 1968 who have done great videos that talk about the black goo, but there's definitely this connection to technology and this black goo. We see it in the symbolism in the Lady Gaga stuff, who obviously promotes this virtual reality. KJ mentioned, and I had the exact same thought when I was watching it, the scene from Under the Skin, where they're in this dimension of black glass that becomes goo, this substance. And if you have the eyes to see it, it's really everywhere. You see it all over the place. And this idea of a screen and this connection to technology is deeper than I think people realize. Is there a connection with all this deliberately to the monolith that was shown in Space Odyssey 2001? Is that the beginning of this opening of a portal, or this ascension, this advancement, this occult promise that is actually a fulfillment of biblical prophecy, which leads to God's judgment and the restoration of all creation? Are we seeing these elements being presented to us for a reason? And I think we have to step back and take a look at where we're at here, because the internet, which Netflix is built on the internet, right? Stranger Things is a show that's being exclusively delivered on the internet. Really, the internet is an opening into alternative realities. And our devices are just windows into all these different realms. Some of them real and, edited and presented to you. Some of them not real, the world of fantasy or virtual reality or different stories, TV shows, science fiction. We've become a society that conceptually interacts with this non-corporal, metaphysical side of life, the realm of imagination. We call it data or information that's gathered and presented in this medium, but that's the whole point. These ideas, these realms, these virtual worlds require a physical medium to access it. And I think the all-seeing eye symbolism has been one that's represented throughout the occult world, a representation of a window into this unseen world, or this occult underworld, the realm of the imagination that's actually bleeding into our world. And that commentary is really interesting because I believe this is a reality. I believe there is something to human consciousness and human imagination that has a direct relationship with the spiritual world and directly affects our physical world. I want to read for you a quote from a book called The Supernatural Worldview: Examining Paranormal, Psi, and the Apocalyptic by Chris Putnam. It's a really big, thick book. And on page 231, it talks about laboratory evidence for presentiment. Quote, "The presentiment work done by Dean Radin at the Institute of Noetic Sciences is probably some of the most compelling to date. He designed a computer screen interface that flashes emotionally charged images mixed with mundane ones and recorded people's emotional responses to a randomized series of pictures selected by computer using a random number generator from a pool of around 700 images. These images, from a standardized set used in psychological experiments, reflects different emotional states: calm, positive, negative, sometimes violent, and erotic. 30 to 40 trials are repeated in one sitting, lasting around 15 minutes. Obviously, the more graphic the image, the higher the expected response evokes. To detect an emotional response, Radin measured skin conductance level. When we are aroused, we always sweat a little, and the moisture increases electrical conductivity on the skin. This electrodermal activity is easily measured. Other indicators are heart rate, blood volume, blood oxygenation, respiration, pupil dilation, blink rate, and eye movement. A more advanced method of using electroencephalography, EEG, and functional magnetic resonance imaging, fMRI, detection of brain activity has also been employed. These are all well-accepted experimental indicators of arousal within psychology. People consistently show an emotional response a few seconds or so prior to the evocative images. Even more interesting, the more intense images elicit a higher anticipatory response. Radin labels this the presentiment effect and believes the results to be evidence of retrocausation, another way of suggesting precognition, albeit reversed. So basically what it's saying is that the body responds to the image before the image is shown consistently. I'm going to continue on here. Quote, "The data on the graphic is from one set of experiments, but is a good general illustration of how the effect works. Consistently, people are aroused 3 seconds before an evocative image is displayed. Radin has concluded several different studies on it with consistent results. His overall odds ratio was 125,000 to 1 against chance in favor of a real precognitive phenomenon. Radin's results were replicated by Dick Bierman, a psychologist at the University of Amsterdam. He did a fMRI study of 10 subjects that shows exactly what parts of the brain are firing in great detail. The amygdala, almond-shaped massive gray matter associated with fear, activates consistently during the presentiment period, and right brain activity is enhanced. In women, he found a presentiment effect for both violent and ironic images, but with men, not too surprisingly, the effect was shown exclusively for the erotic content. His odds against change were 50 to 1. The presentiment data is the strongest to date that nearly all of us have some latent paranormal ability, an idea Watchman Nee arrived at from his reading of Genesis." End quote. And you can get all the citations and references from the book, The Supernatural Worldview. But that's a look into how the human mind has this power to construct reality. The mention of Watchman Nee there is really interesting because, as he documents in the book earlier, Watchman Nee believed that there are latent powers, psychokinetic powers that humans possess that was lost after the fall. And he suggests that, we can tap into a remnant of it, but really that's not something we should be doing, and that's why God forbids witchcraft and all those things. But there is this original design element to this perceptive side of human consciousness, and I think that's true. I think something was different in the Garden of Eden, where God freely walked with us and among us. The translation of the word serpent is Nachash, which can be more accurately translated the shining one. Satan, this rebellious angel, was a shining one that could communicate openly with Eve, who was clearly made out of dirt because Adam was made out of dirt. So there you have it. There's evidence, proof that humans had this extra perceptory ability, and it was lost at the fall, and it remains through human imagination. And I think that's why science fiction appeals to us so much, because there is this deep inherent truth that resonates when you enter the world of science fiction, where possibilities are endless. And the scary thing, I think, with what is alluded to with the darkness, the dark side of this, is that it can manifest into our world in a very unsavory way. Now, some of this footage I'm about to show may be hoaxes, may not be hoaxes, but they're the kinds of things that compel us because they are in the realm of the paranormal and unexplained. And I think the genuine encounters, the genuine experiences that people have are directly related to tapping into or interacting or blending into this other side or this other dimension. And think about this as it pertains to the show Stranger Things. A physical portal is found, And the police chief, Jim Hopper, actually finds it, breaks in and does all this stuff. It's pretty awesome, actually, the way he gets through and, just his demeanor and, his punches and stuff. It's pretty awesome. But anyway, he actually finds this physical gateway that's open and enters and sees this underworld. He physically went there. He physically had contact with it through this opening. But 11L, she had the ability to go there exclusively in her mind. And there is that contradiction that can only be explained if you allow metaphysical realities and the supernatural realm to open up to you as a real possibility of how this all works, how the world of the physical and non-physical interact, and how ultimately, as a Christian, we know that there is evil on this landscape. When you open up your eyes to the world of the spiritual, you see the pockets of darkness that are all over the place. But it should also help you realize the actual power and the effect we can have in the physical world through something like prayer. Being filled with the Holy Spirit, representing God, the one who created all this, the one who sent his son to restore all this. That's the whole point of the gospel message of what Jesus did. And think about it this way as well. In the show, the Demogorgon is able to smell out blood. You can smell blood from far away. There's a Jaws reference there, but also this idea of blood being spilt creates an opening, creates the portals to open and allow the Demogorgon to come through. Now think about why Jesus Christ shed his blood. The Bible tells us that the life is in the blood, and for some reason, blood sacrifice was something that was required in this fallen, physical, three-dimensional reality to have done in order for the other realm to interact with our realm. And when Jesus shed his blood on the cross, the outer curtain of the temple was torn, right? I believe this is symbolic of Jesus' blood actually making an effect on God being able to manifest here on earth in a big way through millions, billions of people throughout history with the gospel message, with people being filled with the Holy Spirit because we believe in what Jesus did in the act of shedding his blood and in the act of resurrecting from the dead, proving his authority over both realms. And if you think about it, even in the Bible, Jesus went to the underworld when he died. He was there for 3 days. And it was more in a way to mock the fallen entities that were down there and say, sorry, fellas, you guys lose. And in fact, the gesture of baptism is supposed to be in response to that reality, to that idea that Jesus went to the underworld and told all, I'm taking mine with me. And those are the ones that were waiting in Abraham's bosom, which explains when the Old Testament prophets and probably most of those Old Testament folks went to heaven. It was when Jesus came to take them from Abraham's bosom. And this sort of sub-narrative that's there in the Bible is missed by a lot of people, but a story like Stranger Things, ironically, can provoke some of those ideas because it's there in the scriptures. And whether the Duffer Brothers who wrote Stranger Things knew about these themes or not, I'm not sure, but I know that they tried to weave in messianic imagery, especially with the idea of Elle sacrificing herself to eliminate the Demogorgon. But don't be fooled by this messianic imagery and think that it was a deliberate homage to Jesus Christ in the gospel. I don't think it was. Now, I don't know too much about the Duffer Brothers or the people behind making Stranger Things, like Sean Adam Levy, who was one of the executive producers, but I wanted to share something that I saw on episode 4 that sparked something in my mind about a biblical topic, which I found out was not actually in the Bible, but a tradition that was taught from the Zohar, which is a mystical side of Judaism, the document that really undergirds Kabbalah. Very interesting here. So in episode 4, called The Body, there's a scene about halfway through the episode where the scientists working with MKUltra gets a guy, they put a rope on him, and he enters into the Upside Down. And they try to maintain radio communication with him, and he's supposed to go in there. And it reminded me of something that I was taught, interestingly, at the first church that I ever attended, which was a mega church, for lack of a better term. And I remember the pastor talking about how in the Bible, especially in the Old Testament, when the high priest would enter into the holiest of holies, they would tie a rope around his waist or around his ankle in case the priest died in the presence of God, and so they can drag out the body. Well, come to find out, that's not actually in the Bible at all. This was a 13th century tradition that was created as a custom written down in the Zohar, which again is the document that upholds modern day Kabbalah or mystical Judaism. So I found it interesting that in the show, they would have that little homage there to this idea that you tie a rope onto a high priest when they go into the holiest of holies. And, maybe subconsciously they were revealing a reality, a spiritual reality, that the God that they worship is actually a demon, a demigorgon, some sort of fallen divine entity. And yes, I do find it disturbing that the pastor at my old church would freely teach something that came straight out of the Zohar. In hindsight, that's pretty alarming. I do think there's a reason why God took me out of that church. But in any case, there's even something more disturbing about this show, or the making of this show. But it's something I've been curious about in terms of entertainment media in general. And that is when the genre of horror, especially, is intermixed with kids on set. How does that work? And interestingly enough, according to the 50 facts you didn't know about Stranger Things by YouTuber The Y Guy, fact number 22 said that the kids, the toddlers on set, were terrified by the monster. So the producers told them, oh, just think like it's the monster from Monsters, Inc. I found this very interesting because as a program that talks about child experimentation and, mind control with young people, ironically, these actor kids are being exposed to the same methodology, breaking down their fears in a certain way. And obviously, this is a little bit more of an innocent example, although I still think it's a little bit weird that they would say, oh yeah, just like the movie Monsters, Inc., appealing to a story that changes the concept of what a monster really is in the mind of a young person. Now, the history of childhood actors and stuff is not good in the entertainment industry, and I'm not saying that anything truly nefarious happened here to these kids. I'm just saying that, ironically, there seems to be this connection with Disney. Again, Disney always pops up, and being used as an example, a template for these kids to live out their acting and, portray certain ideas to another generation, that sort of thing. There's an element of irony there, or an element of hypocrisy inherent in this sort of media. And again, I don't even know if this is intentional by the people making it, but it's something that I'm pointing out because maybe there is a spiritual reality to this, a unseen hand that is putting this sort of influence out there because they're really preparing the masses for something very bizarre to happen. And I truly believe that is the case, both in terms of the fulfillment of biblical prophecy, because to be 100% honest, you read what's supposed to happen as things get fulfilled, and they are the most bizarre and strange things that you can ever think of. So the fact that we are all being conditioned for this high strangeness tells me that we are leading to some very interesting times. And the obvious connection with the character Elle, with E.T., with her abilities to levitate things, and even throughout the storyline, how they follow a similar plot line in the development of the character. I think there's something to be said to making a connection between a human girl and the extraterrestrial. This is a very deliberate connection that, again, intentionally or not, has ties to this messianic messaging, which ultimately seems to be this extraterrestrial power or ability that might define who will ultimately become the Antichrist, the one who people say, who can make war with him? Beyond simply the geopolitical power and might that the Antichrist has traditionally been interpreted as having, one of the things between the Antichrist and the false prophet, they will have supernatural abilities. Now, the false prophet in Revelation 13 is really the one performing miracles, the one who can call fire down from heaven. He's the one that really raises the first beast from his mortal head wound. So these fulfillments are swirling with supernatural things, and there's a deep connection to technology, obviously, with how technology is becoming the fulfillment of these objects because of where they're headed. They're speaking in religious language. They're talking about living forever. They're talking about advancing and evolving and uploading our minds to the machine and merging with the machine and becoming gods. And with this sort of language, the false promise of ye shall be as gods is still being played here by the enemy. And the sad thing is humanity is still buying into it. And apart from just being a really great show, Stranger Things really does make your brain tick and make you have an excuse to dive into these really deep rabbit trails, not just from the connection of the show itself, but where it overlaps with reality, because the truth is, reality is becoming stranger than fiction, and there are places where reality and non-reality are overlapping, and that tear is becoming larger and larger. And I think while we are interacting with it daily without even noticing, the sorts of physical manifestation of the influence of the other side will become more and more apparent as time goes on. And this is where, again, I go back to all the paranormal footage that's been caught recently, and the growing number of experiences being reported, high strangeness with things like the strange phenomenon with Slenderman. Do you remember this story from back in 2014?
I've been here for over 24 years as a cop in the city of Waukesha, and I have not seen a crime of this nature, especially when you take into account it was 12-year-old girls.
12-year-olds Morgan Geyser and Anissa Wire are accused of attempted murder of their 12-year-old friend when police say they lured her into the woods and stabbed her 19 times, leaving her for dead.
These are the woods where the stabbing actually happened. It's several blocks away from the park where all of this began. The victim was able to get to this area here where the bicyclist found her, nearly dead. She was within a millimeter of her life. She was within a millimeter of one of the stab wounds, striking a major artery to her heart, along with the other 18 stab wounds that she had.
Police say Geyser and Wire plotted for months the best way to kill their friend. According to authorities, they first plotted to duct tape her mouth and stab her in the neck, then changed their plans to lure her into the woods while playing a game of hide and seek. The motive, say police, to win the favor of a fictional internet horror character called Slenderman, who the girls found on the horror fantasy website creepypasta.wikia.com.
Well, Slenderman was a fictional character that was created as part of a joke back in 2009. Most of his representation, Slenderman is this thin, tall, faceless character. Now, the creepy part about the character is, in most stories, he kills children.
The Creepypasta website is one venue for the Slenderman character, but as I started looking into it, he's everywhere. Yes. Is there a sense that they were reading about him and studying him in various forms online, not just Creepypasta? That's still being investigated as far as all their internet sites. Obviously, we're doing the computer forensic evidence of their computers and such. I would assume that it will turn out to be more than just Creepypasta, but all sites have to be of concern to parents.
Now, I find it interesting that in this CNN report from back in June 2014, it happened to twist the whole story into, oh, watch out for the internet. But in reality, what we're talking about here is the power of imagination and the power of manifestation. And it goes back to the central theme in the show, Stranger Things, which blends this idea of the unseen world mixing with ours at a very physical level, but then having this very powerful connection to the human imagination, to the human mind, and to human consciousness, and how those two things work together and how they operate and reflect off one another. It reflects this metaphysical reality that is real, that isn't considered enough, I think, in our day-to-day lives. So those are some of my thoughts from the show Stranger Things on Netflix. I know I didn't go specifically into the plot or anything like that. I didn't because, again, other videos did a pretty good job of that. I didn't want to just repeat all that, so I wanted to take you to different places, to different rabbit trails that are there that can be explored in more detail if you so choose to go down that path. So if you have watched it, hopefully it gave you something more to think about and maybe go back and watch it again. If you haven't watched it, now you can see it if you choose to, knowing some of the symbolic imagery that's going to be there so you can identify it on the spot, or maybe you don't want to watch it at all, which that's up to you too. So remember though, do all this with keeping steadfast to the word, being in prayer constantly, because again, we do affect this physical reality with our minds, and prayer is part of that process to demonstrate and exercise the gifts of the Holy Spirit. So things to think about. Again, hope you got something out of this. Have an awesome day, guys. God bless.